Hi, and welcome to Be an Ally, Design and Develop Accessible Software. I'm Rachel Appel, and I will be your host for this session. Let's start by talking about why we should care about accessibility and building it into our software. It's not just disabled parking spots. It's the right thing to do. There are so many people that have accessible needs, and we need to make sure that they have ease of use when they're using our software. But if you're not convinced just because it's the right thing to do, well, at some point in your life, you or a loved one will absolutely have accessible needs. It might be temporary or it might be permanent, but you will at some point. And I'm going to point that out, how this may happen during this session. But if this still doesn't convince you, maybe you think you're an exception. Maybe you think your family won't need this. Well, fine. How about a big old fat pile of cash? Well, didn't think I was going to go there, did you? Capitalism sometimes rules. But worldwide, over 1 billion people are considered to have a disability and would have accessible needs. And they have over 1.2 trillion in annual disposable income. That number balloons to 8 trillion. And you can see the source of this is from Forrester at the bottom of this slide. This is a lot of money. And I point out the money because A, if you really don't think that doing the right thing is important, then do it for the money. Just do it. Please just do it. That's the important thing. But if the right thing isn't the thing for you, well, get it into your software somehow and maybe the money will convince you. But this doesn't just establish money as the only motive. It does establish that there is a lot of people, over 1 billion, that have these needs out of 7 billion. So that is quite a bit and a significant number who use software. So in the USA alone, 62.8 million Americans out of 330 million. And you can see the stats here. About a quarter have some kind of difficulty. Vision, dexterity, 20% with a hearing difficulty, 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic. So we have all kind of different needs that fall outside of that bell curve of what society tends to use the word normal for. I don't like that word because I don't think there's such a thing. Everybody is different. But some folks have a much harder time with vision. They might actually be blind, so then they can't use a computer the way we do. Or they may have a dexterity issue, so they can't use a mouse and they need a touchpad or something else. And it's a lot of people, and it's definitely the right thing to do is to target everybody. But if that's not available to you, not something you're interested in, you can make a good deal of money that you're missing out on if you don't build your software for accessibility. Aging is another area, and we're all aging. And that's one reason why I said you or a loved one absolutely will have these needs. The US sees the over 65 population go from 35 to over 49 million in just 2016, in just 16 years, from 2000 to 2016. So things that happen, we all see this everywhere. We see it in movies, we see it in our own lives, our neighbors, our family, aging adults. It's part of the experience of being human. You might have short-term memory loss, vision issues, hearing issues, motor function issues, all sorts of things. And I've even noticed myself, as I get older, the prescription for my glasses keeps going up a bit, a little bit stronger. And I notice I can't fine-tune, select down to the pixel with the mouse anymore. And other, fine-tune skills, motor skills or vision skills, or even some hearing is not the same as it was 20 years ago. And I'm not even that old. I'm still a Gen Xer here. So the baby boomers are a huge population. And we make software for them just as well as we do for everybody else. So it's a big group of people. While we do have many, many accessible options and different accessible hardware and software to help, what happens is when people with accessible needs are asked, like, what do you want? Do you want the websites and the software to be better? Or do you want the assistive technology to be better, and then that will enable the websites and the software to be better? And basically everybody said, like overwhelming here, 81.3% said, no, we want the websites to be more accessible. And websites are horrible for accessibility with pop-up ads, advertising ruins everything. It's not just annoying. It is to some of us just annoying, but to some people, it completely stops them from being able to access your website. And then that defeats the entire purpose of having the advertising there in the first place. So you actually have a double whammy of missing out on the money issue again. So if we go to the source of this, which is at an organization called WebAIM, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative, they have a plethora of resources and training and all kind of good stuff. And I suggest everybody go to webaim.org and check out what they have. And I will refer to many, many links from WebAIM as we go through this session. But what we need to know is it's not up to somebody else to make better assistive technology for people. It's up to us to make better software for people. So that's what we're here to do. So there are some types of accessible needs that we're going to take a look at today. Visual, that's the big one, especially with computing. Auditory, motor, and cognitive. Now, as you move into things like the HoloLens and the virtual AI glasses and things like that, or augmented reality, then these needs are still there, but how we would deal with them might change. Obviously, if you're wearing goggles for a VR experiment as opposed to just accessing a computer. But these are the four main categories of accessible needs that we have. And we'll start with visual. Starting with visual, we have assistive technology. And when I'm in a live audience, I like to ask people, who here today is using an accessible technology right now? And usually hardly anybody raises their hand unless they maybe have a walking stick or something like that, or are in a wheelchair. And then I will say, I'm using them right now. And people look at me and they go, no, we can't see anything. Well, I wear glasses. Glasses are an assistive technology. Now, they're not high tech, but they are technology, and they weren't even available a few hundred years ago. So just imagine how much benefit to the human race just eyeglasses are. So just think of the benefit there, and then think about if we could apply the benefits of just eyeglasses even to software, what we could do for people. Or on the slide here, there's the pictures, there's glasses, the trackpad, which was actually started as an assistive technology. And something else I'll bring up again and again in this session is things that we do to help people with accessible needs and build in accessibility actually help those without it. So if you consider yourself a fully able-bodied person with absolutely no problems whatsoever or difficulty doing regular daily tasks in life, still, if you use a trackpad, or how about an escalator, those things are accessible technology, right? They help you. They're assistive technology, and they help you do things. Another one is your phone. Anybody find that you have to turn on the little light switch on your phone or the flashlight feature on your phone to read a menu that's on the left of the screen? Yes, well, again, that extra bit of light in that case and under that context is an assistive technology. So sometimes these technologies are low-tech, sometimes they're high-tech, and very often we, as developers, can be the catalyst for making an experience much, much better for both those with the accessible needs and those without. So for assistive technology that people tend to use with software, so we want to make the best software so that this technology has the easiest time using the software on behalf of the assistive user. So then we have things like screen narrators, NVDA, JAWS, to name a few, Braille readers, mouth sticks. Stephen Hawking was in a full setup, and he had a sip and puff switch. And he had different switches, the mouth stick and some of the others. Had wand for a while, I believe, so he's gone through a few rounds of assistive technology. The oversized trackball mouse, adaptive keyboards, eye tracking glasses, all of these things, Braille readers. There's the mouth stick, right? Single access switch, the different kinds of ways to capture input or to present output is these assistive technologies. And people do use them. They use them to access websites and the internet every day. They use them to use mobile apps as a help for that. They use it in all kinds of scenarios. And you want to make sure that your software works with these as well as without. But I see in most places that I go, most companies, and when I talk to most individuals, they just kind of don't even think about this stuff. And at a minimum, I would love for everybody to at least think about this. Think about who your users really are. If a good 20 to 25% of them have combined usage of these tools and assistive technologies, you are missing out on a big audience for your software. So you really want to think about that. Those are big numbers. And any manager would jump right on a 20% number. So you want to make sure you capture those users. So definitely think assistive technology and accessible design first before you start with everything else. Here's one from the Xbox team. It's the adaptive Xbox controller. So let's start with the visual, and we'll take a look at some of the visual accessible needs that we have. In that realm, we go anywhere from low vision to blindness, and then we have color blindness and color contrast. They're kind of the main categories of visual accessibility needs. So if we are blind or if we are low vision, we might find ourselves in need of a screen narrator. Here's a few. There's many that work inside a browser. So you have plugins for like IE and Edge, Chrome, Apple VoiceOver, actually not necessarily a browser specific, but part of Apple. Also, NVDA and Web Anywhere and JAWS are just separate downloads. Most of these are free that are on the screen, but some of them are commercial products as well. Some are open source. MIT's even trying a few things like the experimental technology with the finger reader, where you can just kind of skim across a page with your finger and it will read the words for you, which is really cool. So we have screen narrators. What I can suggest with considering these, which this is a very big chunk of visually disabled people, and that is that they're working on a web page. That narrator has to go through and read everything on the page. And that can get tedious, and often elements jump around, or the very infamous little pop-up advertising that if you have perfect eyesight and perfect dexterity has the tiniest little close button that you can barely get to, even if you have perfect vision and dexterity. And then try to work with this thing if you have a screen narrator. It's impossible. And these things can actually make it so that people can't even use your website. So we don't want that. You don't want to chase people away. So consider that a significant portion of your users are going to use a screen narrator. If you go to WebAIM.org, you can even see some videos of how people use screen readers. Actually, blind people use screen readers, screen narrators to access your websites. And you might even want to try it yourself. NVDA is one of the more popular, and I find it's very easy to use. And I suggest everybody download it. Blindfold yourself or put a little sleep mask over your eyes, and then go to a website that you use every day and try to listen to it and see if you can keep up with what it's narrating and what it's talking about. You'll find out that even if you use a website every single day, it's going to be difficult. And then imagine having to do this every day. You can't escape it, and it's the only way you can access the web. And then, trying it with websites that you've never been to before is just murderous. It's terrible. One issue with this is the menu bar. So menus are great. They usually make it so that folks can navigate and find their way around your website or your software. However, the screen narrator has to repeat the menu every single time somebody makes a choice from the menu and navigates to a new page. Look, once you've seen that there's a home, an about us, a products page, and all those standard pages that you see, you don't need to hear it again and again. And screen readers can often take minutes, like five minutes even, just to go through a menu bar. It's ridiculous. So what we can do to alleviate that hassle for people with screen readers is to use what's called the skip link. What we do with the skip link is we just make an anchor and we hide it. So in this little sample of code, I just created a CSS class called hidden, and I'll show you that class on the next slide. And we're just hiding this anchor, and it's the very first thing under the body. And you don't have to hide it, but often people do so that the visual appealing of the site still holds. But here I would have this link, and it points to an anchor point in the page. And in this case, I just called it main content. And this way, if somebody has a narrator, the narrator can then pick this up because it uses the DOM rather than the visual elements of the page. And then somebody can hit a tab key or some hotkey to say, skip over that menu and just take me to that content. And then, of course, the actual content could be that named anchor, or in this case, I just made a little sample with the anchor, or a tag called main, a more semantic tag that has that ID. So either way works, but what you're doing is just giving somebody a way to just skip over the fluff and the stuff that they don't need that takes up a lot of precious time. Now that CSS is here. So I just called it hidden. You could call it whatever you want, and you could just set the position absolute and left at way out in left field. Make the height and the width just 1 pixel, and that way it's going to shove a tiny pixel way up in the top of the screen where nothing else can really see it. Now we do it this way. It is a bit of a workaround, but it's because screen narrators, very many of them, have to find an element out of the DOM. So if the width and the height is 0, or if you use the hidden of other than overflow hidden, if you just said like visibility not visible or something like that, or disabled it, then the screen readers can't necessarily get to it. So we do have to have an actual element. So even if it's 1 by 1 pixel and shoved way up where the other elements are not going to be. Now, a second option you can do, and this is not the only option actually, you can use something like Bootstrap, All right, so Bootstrap I just personally kind of like, and I tend to write a lot of code in ASP.NET, and with that, a lot of the templates come with Bootstrap, so it makes it very easy for an ASP.NET developer, but there are other CSS libraries out there too as your other option. Now, if you're using Bootstrap, they have two classes, SR for screen reader only, and screen reader only focusable classes. So those say, hey, look, if it's not a screen reader, skip over it. But screen readers, take a look here and read this for people or make sure it's brought to their attention. There are some things we'll see called ARIA, such as the landmark. You might need to use them, but only if you really, really have to do far backwards compatibility to browsers that are barely alive anymore, and you don't have access to Semantic HTML. But other than that, I would suggest using something like Bootstrap or a CSS library that has accessibility built into it for your web development, and they'll provide the skip links and works for them, or you can just create your own with the anchor, the named anchor, and the hidden CSS. So that helps them get through a lot of stuff right off the bat in a website. There's also an accessibility plugin for Bootstrap that you could use, and here's the link for it. You can get it right off of GitHub, and you can, download that code and modify it to your needs as well. Past screen readers and narrators. Color blindness is an issue, and it's maybe 8%, and it's mostly men, but there are, I believe, maybe few women, and there's also like a dry eyes condition where women sometimes get a little bit distorted color, but we have these tools that you can use. The one's called a color oracle, and the other's called an accessibility color wheel, and a color blindness simulator. So these are pretty great. From here, I can simulate the different types of color blindness. So here I could say, is it green week or blue week or red week? And I can upload different pictures. I can upload my own, and I could come in here and see what it looks like with these different types of color blindness. And then you can see what somebody else might experience on your site. So that's a really, really cool thing to be able to do. Another one is this Color Oracle tool. So this one you can actually download it and run it locally, and it'll just change whatever's on your desktop to the different types of color blindness and to simulate it. So that helps out. The accessibility color wheel, what that gives us is a way to be able to pick out different color schemes like foreground and background and see if it's very accessible or not. So here, if I went to a red foreground, it doesn't think this is very good. So if I change that around and I just start even moving around, oh, some of these look terrible, and it's telling me no, it's terrible. So you could come and pick out a color scheme that works really great. Something that works, for everybody. Contrast is one of these other things. And contrast, you actually don't necessarily need any type of or have any type of accessible needs for contrast to be an issue. Just take a look at these samples here. On the left, I have bad contrast, and on the right, good. There will be people who probably can't even see the one on the left, right? The bad, which is like a yellowish on a white background. So what we could say is contrast would be a nice light color on a dark background, or conversely, a dark color on a light background, but there are some color combinations that are horrible together, even though they might be light and dark contrasted. So let's take a look here. This one's not good. It's not terrible, but it's like that light yellow on a, like a periwinkle blue, something like that. A better contrast is just black on blue, on that nice light blue. A terrible contrast, and I see this color scheme a lot, like that just kind of dark Dracula purple on gray, like a charcoal gray. No, people can't see that very good. You've got to squint, and sometimes this even hurts your eyes. A good contrast instead would be white on that charcoal background. This red and green thing also, once in a while you come across this. This has to go. That's terrible. Your eyes bleed. Good though, I'm not a fan of the color, that particular color green, but white on that color green does work. Here's another popular one that is not a good contrast, is like a medium-ish gray, medium to light gray on a white background. Not the best. A lot of people will have a hard time seeing that. A good contrast is just black on white. I know, boring, but it works. Or just red, plain red on white. Something that's clear and easy to see. So use that color accessibility wheel. Just go to the website and play with the colors. That'll check your contrast. WebAIM also has a contrast checker, so we're good there too. Here's an example of terrible contrast, and I'm calling you out on this one, Weather Channel. I don't know where they came up with this one, but one day I went in to look at something for a little town I was in Pittston, Pennsylvania, USA. And I went to see the allergies there. And look at it. You can't even, inside of that red square, it's light gray and white text on it. And there's a couple of dots, 2 green dots and like an orange dot. And I don't even know, I can't even see what they say. I know it has something to do with allergies. Below that, you can see some more of the page, but that part in the red is just horrible, and that should never have happened. That is the worst contrast I've seen in a very popular public website like this in a long time. So don't be that website. That there. You can do your color contrast checking if you go to WebAIM/resources/contrast checker. And that has some good stuff there for you. For accessible screen readers, again, so we'll revisit this a bit. Something that will help, and this isn't just screen readers, but there's a lot of great reasons to use Semantic HTML. Came out with HTML5, but it gives a good way for a lot of tools to access valuable information about the website and about each page semantically, and it gives more meaning and depth to those, like when those tools try to read it. And among them are screen narrators. So things like using nav for your navigation, article, to say that, you know, this is an article or something with a lot of text, where the header is, not to be confused with the head tag, which is just the metadata for the page. The footer, the main content, a legend if there is a legend, and labels. And they're just a few of the tags, but they're definitely worthwhile looking and making sure that if you do have HTML, that it is upgraded or reworked to use Semantic HTML. Now, if you are using ASP.NET, there's a data annotations namespace, and if you use the tags out of there, the attributes, and you apply them to classes that generate HTML, they'll generate the proper Semantic HTML for you. So that is fantastic. So that's a great help with ASP.NET in particular. Other non-Microsoft tools have some help for this as well. But again, I work in the land of Microsoft, so ASP.NET, I definitely know where this stuff is at. For forms, do things like use the field set and use a legend to group checkboxes and radios. So make sure that you use those. Screen narrators will be able to then identify that this is a form to fill out, and it will be able to identify more information about the form than it would normally be able to figure out just by inspecting the DOM and seeing an input here and, you know, something else there, some other element or whatever. So it's going to definitely give us a lot more info. So here's an accessible form, a snippet of one. So you would use a label with your input. Labels are helpful for so many reasons. And in this case, this would be a little snippet from ASP.NET. But something else we might want to do is the required thing that happens. Often you see just a star, just an asterisk to denote a required field. First off, a lot of people just rub their monitor and think, oh, it's a speck of dirt. Because it's just a little black asterisk. Okay, so people change it to red. Well, then the people who are colorblind go, oh, it's like a little brown smudge or some other color smudge. And they don't necessarily identify with this very well. So it's hard to see because it's just a tiny single character. And yeah, we don't want to be necessarily shoving big notes in people's faces. This is required. We want to let them fill in the form first. However, it's not too much in the way to just put the word required in a span, and then you can also additionally color code that as well. Now, whatever you do, don't rely on colors alone because of the color blindness problem. So you can't rely on colors alone. You do have to at least tell them it's required. I say just take the little square brackets, put the word required in there. That's usually not unattractive. It usually works well with most UXs. But if you really hate doing that, that's fine. You could use a tooltip. And if you look at the link on the bottom, oaa-accessibility.org has this nice little tooltip that pops up, but it is not modal and it does not get in the way. So it's kind of out of the way, but when people move past the field, it will then tell them this field was required. So when you do your validation, required and other things, just remember, don't rely on just color. Don't rely on just a star. Just make it clear for people, whether it be with one of the accessible tooltips or just square brackets and required. Use HTML where possible, and you might need to rely on what's called an ARIA tag or an ARIA attribute. An ARIA attribute is from Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and what these are a set of attributes that we can add to HTML elements, and these attributes give metadata to screen narrators and other accessible devices. Generally, though, as time marches on, these are less and less necessary because HTML is actually building in more accessible. So they're doing what the folks in the survey in the beginning of this session asked for. They said, well, we want better websites. And the W3C said, yes, we're going to make that happen. So they've been building in Semantic HTML and other things so that people didn't have to make these workarounds. But if you have an older browser, you might need to say ARIA required. That way the screen narrator will definitely know that it's required if it can't pick up that information otherwise by looking at the semantic tags. ARIA, again, Accessible Rich Internet Applications, they have these different roles, states, and properties. So various ways to attach metadata to a DOM element. And all of these are just about enabling assistive technologies to work better. Now, once again, if you have to use ARIA because you're using older browsers or you're specifically targeting older assistive technology, then you might need to rely on ARIA. Or if there's something that does not exist right now in HTML, then you might need ARIA. But otherwise, we can probably be safe using Semantic HTML and some of the more modern approaches. But just keep these in the back of your head. Know that they're there. Now, we move from visual to auditory, and in our auditory accessibility needs, these are a little bit easier for the developer because a lot of the work here is not necessarily the developer. So this is anything from mild hearing loss to total deafness. So auditory needs, Here's another one. Don't rely just on sounds for feedback or as the main part of feedback. Often also, people turn their speakers off or have their headphones plugged in, but they took them off for a bit. So they might be using software and they don't actually get the sounds. So make sure you have, if you're going to use sounds, it's okay, but make sure you also have another way to provide feedback. Whenever you have video, do transcripts or closed captioning? Now that's the thing where the developer is probably not going to do that. Somebody who does copywriting or other kind of text editing or things like that on the website is going to help with that side of things. But be aware, there is a thing called deaf culture. And as part of that, video and sign languages are very big parts of deaf culture. Know things like sign languages actually have accents, just like regular languages, and other things where folks who are deaf and they cannot rely on any kind of auditory stimulus coming from your software, that they do have ways of dealing with it, but you have to roll with them, just like the others. But the big issues here around auditory needs is making sure you have transcripts and closed captioning, and that should help quite a bit. The third major area for accessible needs is the motor dexterity. Now, this could be from injury, illness, disease. There's a lot of ways to get this, and there's a lot of things that are in here. Very common things on the right. Broken bones, like how many people, even as a kid, I broke my arm when I was 6. I remember that, running when I wasn't supposed to be down the hill. Mom said, don't run. I did anyway. So that's what happens, right? Physical injuries, sprains, all kind of things. Arthritis. How many people have arthritis? And it's so painful, and makes a very difficult time with moving joints, maybe in your hands, arms, back, anywhere. So a lot of these common issues. Tremors also. Sometimes anything from hypoglycemia and not, having a bit of low sugar can cause some tremors, to actual essential tremor, all kind of stuff. On the left, you have some more of the hardcore, traumatic injuries, congenital conditions, palsies, ALS, Parkinson's, all sorts of things. So there are many, many things, as well as just aging, making you, a little bit slower, even if you're in great health, right? You might be a little bit slower, not quite as fine-tuned. Like I said before, when I use a mouse, I can't quite get to the pixel anymore that I used to be able to nail that pixel that I want to click on. So sometimes I miss. And I even will launch the wrong program out of the taskbar. So that happens. And especially with the age related. So with motor and dexterity impairments, obviously, you're not going to be able to go through every single one of these things and test for your website, but you want to know they're there, and you want to realize that people are using it, and they are using your software, and they're probably using an assistive technology. So if you take a look at the types of assistive technologies, maybe through some of the stats that you use for a website or other software to see what kind of users are accessing it, then you can get from those numbers and start focusing in on the bulk of your users and trying to capture that audience and make things a little bit easier for them. But that is a significant amount of the population. So some things also, don't forget keyboard alternatives, not just the mouse. Not everybody can mouse very well. And that many people do have like the oversized trackball, the trackpad, or touch screens. Things like that are often important, and we have to make sure that our software works equally well with all of those types of input, and avoid pop-ups and modal dialogues. It's just good UX, quite frankly, and the people who consider themselves perfectly able-bodied without any assistive needs are still going to appreciate having no pop-ups and no modal dialogues. And if you can get rid of advertising pop-ups on a website, even better. People will love you even more. The money there is a different issue, but that's definitely a source of contention for a lot of people. A lot of web news sites and entertainment, popular sites just have these terrible pop-ups with ads in them, and they're just impossible to close, and they move around on people, and it's hard enough to chase them if you're very good with a mouse, let alone trying to do it with a keyboard or one of the other assistive technology devices. The last one is cognitive. And cognitive issues range from autism, anywhere on our spectrum, to memory issues, and that's just aging, even. Injury, illness, seizure disorders, dyslexia is very common. ADD and ADHD is also very common. So the thing about the cognitive disability is that there's not really any tools. You can't just run a tool and say, check out my site tool. Tell me how this is going to work for folks with cognitive accessible needs. You're going to have to sit and think about it. And the biggest things you could do here for all of these, just as kind of a wide-ranging group, keep things simple and clear. As developers, we tend to like to complicate things. It's like a weird thing we do. We like to take simple things and make them complex. Well, great. Write your software like that. No, don't. But keep your UX simple and clear. Something that I really appreciated was, unfortunately, it's dead now, and that's Windows Phone. When Windows Phone came out, they had the simplest, clearest UX. And I even worked at Microsoft at the time, but I don't anymore and haven't for a few years. So I still really wish somebody would revive that UX because it was so fantastic and very clear and simple and easy to use. And they really nailed the accessibility side of things. It was a great UX. The best thing here to do is comprehensive UX testing with as many wide range of users as you can. Now it might be difficult finding the folks, but we have ways now. We can go on Twitter and ask for people or send out newsletters to your customers and whatnot. But there's not really any tool that can help like there is a contrast checker or other things like that. But you do want to just at least keep this in mind, that there are people there and they're using your site and there aren't any tools, but just make sure that things are clear, they flow well, elements are grouped properly. Something that I see is that sneaky ads are stuck right in the middle of articles. So somebody's reading and then they see an ad, and sometimes the way it's printed in there, it looks like it's part of the article. And it's really difficult to figure out where it is, or sometimes if the article has abruptly stopped, it seems like that's happened. So there's these odd little UX things in which an ad is usually sneaking in to get your attention. And I'm starting to think, actually I have been thinking this for a while, and that's that adverts are kind of the root of all evil, right? Because they just cause a lot of issues, especially with the accessible users, but even those of us who aren't. So just consider that we do have a wide range of cognitive abled users as well. Now, as far as tools go, some things that we have a developer tool called the WebAIM Wave Scanner. Now, this is really cool. Wave goes through, and you can do one of two things. You can download it and run it locally and build it into your continuous integration or other kind of build processes that you have. And your Wave Scanner will allow you to check all your web pages as they're rendered, and it will tell you things like, oh, contrast is terrible here, or it's okay here, but you could maybe make it a little better, or you forgot things like, oh, an alt tag on an image is highly important, right? Because a screen reader can't magically tell you what's inside of an image, right? So it needs the alt tag, or that there's no labels, right? So it'll tell you like, oh, you have input fields here, but no labels. Why don't you put labels in here and wrap them in a field set inside of your form? So this wave scanner will do that. Another thing that's at WebAIM is the content accessibility guidelines, and that gives you just a checklist. So you could print this out and actually just physically check. You can also check it off on the computer as well, but checklists are great to make sure that you have everything done. Also, you can build what's in the checklist into your build process as well. There's also the Section 508 and WCAG2 checklists. WCAG2 is newer, the newer version of it, but the Section 508 is specifically from the US, and that is the US guidelines under the American Disabilities Act. Being from the US, I'm much more familiar with these, but European Union has some guidelines as well, as do many countries, and I'm sure South Africa does too. So there's a lot of things, but if you hit things from the Section 508 checklist, it should cover most of the guidelines from other countries as well. So you're going to talk about a lot of overlap, almost all of it, with guidelines that other countries have. So you get these tools. These are the great developer tools. Just build these into your process. And then a lot of this stuff you can just kind of run on autopilot. The tools will remind you to build this in, so you can keep building in accessibility to your software and make your software better. And remember, whenever you make software better for an accessible user, you're making that software better for you, the non-accessible user, as well. So it helps everybody, and it just simply improves the experience of your software. And then finally, from parts of the web content accessibility guidelines, I'll just let you all take a minute to read the screen. But what it basically says here is stop dragging your heels and make what you create accessible. Care about it, right? And if you don't care about it because it's the right thing to do, care about it for the money. At this point, I don't care. I just want you to care. And that's really important, though. It doesn't matter why, but we just need it. And there's not enough software that is accessible for everybody. So it's something that I personally want to make sure that the world can do this, and that we can help lift each other up and help build better experiences for everybody. So thank you. Be an ally. It's the right thing to do, and a lot of cash when you do it.